Welcome back everybody to another episode in my aviation history series, and this video is going to be about a topic that I feel like a lot of people know of, but not a lot of people know about, and that is the United States Army Air Force's Bomber Gunship Escort program from World War II. And I feel like it's time that more people out there knew about it, so let's do a video. And as always, my name is Sean, and this is Sean's Aviation. And just before we get into the video, something I should have been doing a lot more up till now, and that is just asking you guys out there, if you enjoy what you're looking at, if you like what I'm doing, go down below, click on the like page, subscribe to my channel, and by all means, please click on that little notification bell. If that way you guys get alerted when I do get more new content up. I usually try to do the What's on My Desk monthly update beginning of the month. And I usually try to get a video or a series of videos released by the 15th, the middle of the month. So whether that's going to be a tips and tricks video, or an aviation history video, or my time-lapse videos of the previous model builds that I've got done, or an air show video, or some of my new product review videos I'll be doing. So I'm going to try to get something posted by the middle of the month. So please, if you're enjoying this, subscribe, like, and click that notification bell. Let's move on to the video. So in the summer of 1941, as the United States Army Air Force started to see the evidence coming out of the RAF bombing campaign in Europe, it was obvious that bombers were not able to self-defend themselves and an escort would be needed. At this time, however, there was no aircraft in the United States Army Air Force inventory that could fly the long distances needed to escort the heavy bombers to and from their targets. So it was decided in August of 1941 to create a gunship escort variant of each heavy bomber then in service. Now, the idea of an airborne gunship is not a new one. The RAF had the Bolton-Paul Defiant, which was to have flown alongside enemy bombing formations and used its turrets to shoot down said bombers. The Luftwaffe, on the other hand, had the Me-110, a twin-engine heavy fighter loosely designed from the Me-109, and this was to be used to attack enemy bombers as well as to protect their own bombers. With its longer range, concentrated firepower in the nose, and a rear gunner, it was felt this would be able to protect the bombers and itself on the longer range missions. Both of these designs were unable to match the performance of single-engine fighters of the day and were quickly, in the case of the Defiant, retired, and for the 110, removed from frontline service. The Me-110 did live on as a night fighter, as it was not as likely to be attacked during the night as it was during the day, and had space for the radar equipment needed to be a night fighter. It was also used in both the Eastern and Mediterranean theaters where enemy fighters were not as capable, but was removed from frontline daylight operations anywhere the Allies had fighter superiority. So the heavy bomber escort idea on paper sounds great. Take an airframe, load it up with guns and ammo, and insert it into the bomber formation around the outside edges of the formation where it was most vulnerable, and use its extra firepower to protect the bombers from the fighters. Now, there were a few issues that at first glance don't seem obvious, but afterwards are glaringly a problem. And we'll go into those in a little bit. But first, let's take a little look at every variant of gunship bomber that was created. So first up, we have the B-17's gunship cousin, the YB-40. Now, the YB-40 is easily the most well-known gunship version produced. There are many pictures of it online. There is quite a bit of it written about in some of the B-17 books, especially ones that I have seen. So it is a well-known, relatively well-known version. So the main idea, and it was also the one that it progressed the farthest through the developmental program. Which is why a lot of people know about it more than the others. So the main idea was to take the base airframe, remove the bomb racks and the northern bomb sight, and add extra guns and ammunition. So the main difference between a B-17F that it was based on and the YB-40 was the addition of 2 extra gun turrets. The first was mounted under the nose in the so-called chin position. and it had two 50 caliber machine guns, and it replaced the two handheld machine guns that were mounted in the cheek windows on either side of the nose. So this chin turret was actually remote controlled, and where the bombardier would have been sit, he now had a remote gun sight that could control the turret, the guns left, right, up, and down, and wherever he put the target, the guns on the turret would line up. So as the Luftwaffe had increased head-on attacks, there were many field modifications that mounted extra machine guns inside the nose of the B-17F, and this chin turret was a way to basically canonize, so to say. I use canon as in like the movie terms, but to make it an official mod. So a factory mod, let's get a chin turret in place, one that would work well and protect from these head-on attacks. It also allowed for a much larger cone of fire than those handheld machine guns would have allowed, making it a better protection than the handheld machine guns. So there was also a second dorsal turret added behind the bomb bay over the radio compartment and replacing the single handheld machine gun that the radio operator would normally have had. So the waist gunners, they also got an upgrade. So whereas before they had a single mounted 50 cal, now they have twin 50 cal mount, a dual mount. It's a very interesting mount. It's something you don't see pretty much anywhere else. So they had a dual mount 50 caliber. The other thing they did is they staggered the waist guns. So in normal B-17Fs, the waist gunners are side by side, and then they staggered them on the F, and that allowed the gunners more movement so they wouldn't run into each other while trying to shoot down the enemy aircraft. Now the bomb bay, they removed all the bomb racks. The bomb bay was filled with ammunition cans. So not only did it help feed some of the extra gun turrets that were mounted, for example with the upper radio compartment, but they were actually loose mounted cans, so they had more ammo to deliver to the different gunners' positions as they would run out. So in this setup, the aircraft actually carried 14 50 caliber machine guns instead of the standard 11 on a factory F model. So the second production B-17F was set aside, and work began in September of 1942 at the Lockheed Vega plant to convert it into the XB-40 standard. In October of 1942, an order for 13 YB-40s was placed, with a follow-on order in January of 1943 for a further 12. The XB-40 flew for the first time on November 10th, 1942, and testing started to show some of the issues that would later plague the design. So the gross weight for a YB-40 was 63,500 pounds. Now that's 10,000 pounds heavier than a B-17F's gross weight. So between the heavier airframe and the extra drag caused by all the added turrets, the YB-40's performance was drastically lower, and I mean drastically lower. So for example, a fully loaded B-17F could climb to 20,000 feet in 25 minutes. Pretty poor considering today's standards, but for a World War II bomber, that was pretty impressive. 20,000 feet in 25 minutes. A fully loaded YB-40 would get to 20,000 feet in 48 minutes. Twice as slow to climb than a standard B-17F. Despite these performance numbers, the project went ahead and the 23 YB-40s were converted by Douglas at their Tulsa, Oklahoma facility, with the first aircraft being completed in March of 1943. There was some further testing of different gun layouts, including a 4-gun chin and 4-gun tail turrets, larger caliber weapons up to a 40mm cannon, and some designs having upwards of 30 guns installed. In the end, the layout of the XB-40 was kept, with the rear upper turret being moved slightly farther aft and the waist gunners being staggered instead of directly across from each other to allow more freedom of movement. And eventually, the two handheld 50 calibers were put back into the cheek positions. This final design had 16 machine guns fitted. So the initial 13 YB-40s ordered was sent to the ETO, the European Theater of Operations, for operational testing. One was lost on delivery due to fuel starvation. It was recovered and repaired, but never ended up flying in combat. The remaining 12 were sent to the 92nd Bombardment Wing and began to fly combat missions starting in May of 1943. I will include a breakdown at the end of this video of all of the missions flown by the YB-40s, as well as a breakdown of their serials and assigned units, and any names that those aircraft carried, just as it is a lot of information to kind of throw out at you in the video. So if you're interested in that, head to the end. I'll have a couple of tables showing all that information at the end. So suffice it to say, these tests did not go well. The main problem is that increased weight due to the extra ammo, extra guns, and extra armor. So with all that extra weight, the aircraft just could not keep up with the standard bombers in the bomber formation. And that became even bigger problem once the bombers dropped the weight. So once the bomb loads were gone, once the bombers dropped their bomb loads over the target, these YB-40 gunships now became 4,000 to 8,000 pounds heavier than their bomber cousins. And they couldn't stay in formation with the bombers. These bombers just want to get home and get out of the target area, and they're forced to fly slower so the YB-40s could stay in formation. So the final operational test mission was flown on July 29th of 1943, and the program was wound down and considered a failure, with one aircraft lost in combat on June 22nd. Not only was the aircraft unable to keep up with formations, on one mission, all 5 YB-40s had to turn around before even forming up with the formation because they were unable to catch up to the formation to form with them. Also, if you average out the number of confirmed shoot-downs over the YB-40s, over the 12 aircraft that were in service, over the 48 sorties that those 12 aircraft flew into combat situations, the YB-40s only confirmed 5 German aircraft shot down, and statistically, it was no better than a standard B-17 at shooting down the enemy. So another note to keep in mind is as the YB-40 program was being wound down and considered a failure, you also had things like the P-51B and C long-range fighters coming into service. And these were actually able to escort the bombers all the distances they needed to and from the target, so the idea of needing to have this escort bomber embedded in the formations became less of a priority as these long-range fighters came into service. So if you want to know more about the P-51, I do have a 3-part history. They just finished being uploaded, so all 3 are up. There should be a link somewhere here at the top. You can click on that. It'll take you to the very first video in that 3-video series, and you can go through and get caught up on all of that. The 12 surviving YB-40s from the operational testing were returned to the United States, and all 24 of the remaining airframes, 12 from the ETO and the 12 that remained stateside, ended up being used as gunnery training aircraft until the end of the war, eventually being sold for scrap and melted down. Now, interestingly, there are a number of pictures of these being used as stateside trainers, and there are shots of them in the scrapyard in the 1946 movie, The Best Years of Our Lives. So even though it was considered a failure, some of the modifications done to the YB-40 were carried over to production B-17s and added to a final design. So the most obvious was that chin turret. It was eventually used on some of the late model B-17Fs, and every version of the B-17G that rolled off the production lines had that chin turret installed. So in the G models, where the YB-40, the gun sight replaced the Norden bomb sight. In the B-17G model, that still had the Norden bomb sight, that remote sight folded out of the way. So it'd fold up to the side, he would be able to use his gun sight, and then he could fold the turret control back down when he needed to in terms of combat. So also on later model Gs, not the early models, but the later models, they adopted that staggered waist gunner's position that the YB-40 pioneered. So it's worth noting at this point that there were a number of field modifications made to B-17s in Europe, in the Pacific as well, but specifically in Europe, that anecdotally get connected to the YB-40 program, but actually have nothing to do with the YB-40 program. And I feel like I should probably go over those now so that everyone out there, you guys know what is and what isn't part of the YB-40 program. So I'll put some pictures up of these aircraft as I go through them. So I know that there was one at the B-17G with a 20mm cannon mounted in the tail. And there was one B-17, I don't know if it was an F or a G, but there was a B-17 that was field modified to have a 20mm cannon sticking out of the nose. And there was also one, a B-17G, that had a fixed, now this one's a crazy one, it had a fixed chin turret with 6 machine guns mounted into it. It looks ridiculous, and I'm sure the idea was great, but with a fixed firing machine gun, you're limited with what you can actually hit. So it didn't really go anywhere. It's just an interesting picture. And a lot of people might think it's photoshopped. It is not photoshopped. It's an actual aircraft, was modified with a 6-gun chin turret just like this in World War II. Now finally, one that very usually gets connected with the YB-40 program, there was a B-17E that was converted to have a powered nose turret and a powered tail turret. And this got known as, it was called the Dreamboat. And it was modified in England. And you can even see under the nose here where the bomb aimer's position got relocated like a bathtub under the nose. It had nothing to do with the YB-40 program. It was a local conversion to add powered turrets to the nose and tail of the B-17. I believe they used British designed turrets when they did this. I haven't been able to find too much information on it, but not a YB-40. Now, the YB-40 wasn't the only gunship conversion that happened, so let's take a look at the next one, and that's the B-24's gunship cousin, the YB-41. So at the same time that Boeing had been requested to turn the B-17 into the YB-40, Consolidated was asked to turn its current B-24 model, the D model, into a gunship. So the modifications were similar to those that were done to the B-17. The glass nose of the B-24D was modified, and the same chin turret from the YB-40 was mounted to the chin of the YB-41. The waist guns also went from a single handheld to a dual handheld, just like the YB-40, and a second dorsal turret was fitted at the rear fuselage just ahead of where the waist gunners would be located, and the forward turret, which stayed in its same position, was actually mounted on a raised platform to allow it to shoot effectively its field of fire to go over the rear turret. The aircraft was delivered to Elgin Field in Florida in January of 1943, and testing was done for 2 months, finishing up in March of 1943. It was found that the YB-41 suffered from the same shortcomings as the YB-40, and it was deemed unsuitable for combat. Consolidated made further modifications, including the fitting of wide blade propellers as well as the removal of some armor, but performance did not appreciably improve. As such, the YB-40 project was cancelled, and the sole airframe was relegated to a maintenance instructional airframe. It was reported as scrapped at Maxwell Field in Alabama in 1945. Of note, even though the B-24D already had a full perspex nose, the upper half of the YB-41 nose has been modified with something that almost looks like the upper half of a B-17 perspex. This, in my opinion, was there to allow for an unobstructed view for the gunner controlling the chin turret, as the earlier style with the metal framing would cause blind spots. Now, there was one other bomber that got converted into a gunship escort version, and it is one that very few people know anything about, and that is the YB-29 Escorter. So this model was never assigned a separate model number the way that the YB-40 and the YB-41 were, but it was designed to fulfill the same need. So the 4th production B-29 4136957 was modified during the early summer of 1943 into a heavily armed gunship. The nose window where the bombardier had been located was replaced by an experimental Urkel ball turret that housed twin 50 caliber machine guns. There were also 2 fixed barbettes on either side of the cockpit with remote controlled twin 50s on either side. And the rear sighting blisters on the rear fuselage was also replaced with barbettes housing twin 50 caliber machine guns. Now the 4 turrets on the YB-29s normally held 2 50 caliber machine guns each, and every single one of these turrets was augmented with a 20mm cannon. Now production B-29s ended up having a 4-gun upper front turret, but the YB-49 only had twin cals in all 4 turrets. Now the tail turret, which was normally twin 50 cals and a 20mm cannon, had the cannon replaced with a 30mm unit. This meant that where a standard YB-29 had 10 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, the Escorter had 20 50 caliber machine guns, 4 20mm cannons, and 1 30mm cannon. So as I mentioned earlier in this episode, the YB-40 operational test lasted from March to July of 1943, when the bomber gunship idea was officially declared a failure and the program was shut down. With the YB-29 Escorter program only starting up in the June or July of 1943 timeframe, by the time the aircraft was ready, it was already considered to be obsolete. As such, only cursory testing was completed before the aircraft was relegated to a training duty, and it was apparently named cross-country. I am unable to find any pictures of it as cross-country or in a training role, but everything I can find online states that it was turned into a training airframe. Now, whether that was an airworthy trainer or just a ground instructional airframe, again, I can't find any evidence one way or the other. But either way, the aircraft didn't last very long in its gunship guise. So the entry into service of the P-51 and the lessons learned by the 8th Air Force during the summer and fall of 1943, the idea of a self-defending bomber was a thing of the past. Until the advent of SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, the need for a long-range escorting fighter to protect daylight bombers was a necessity and led to such interesting designs such as the XP-81 and the P-82 in order to get long-range escorting, and leaves these bomber escort gunships as a fairly unknown footnote in aviation history. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to include a couple of tables here, so you'll get to be able to see the list of all of the YB-40 serials and their names that were assigned to them. I'll then put down a list of those serials again with what units they were assigned to, and then a list of all of the missions that were flown by the YB-40s in the testing facility, in the testing program. So if you guys want to see that, stick around. If not, we will see you all next time. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching, guys, and as always, if you are interested in any of the content you see, you can access my website at www.seans-aviation.com. You can see all the latest pictures of aircraft and museums and the build logs of all of my current models and past models on that site. And if you're interested in any of this content, please click the subscribe button here on YouTube to follow more. Thank you very much, and see you guys next time.